May the 3rd, 5:51 p.m., 2021, and I've spoken so much about these lines, I thought I'd just do a quick screen capture video on these things. Finding the right line for your stove isn't always easy, okay? This looks very familiar to a lot of people. That's the standard Lindell valve. I could show you what I've been using in the videos. Very similar lines. This one, the tip is off. We'll get to that later, okay? Um, what you'll find is when you start looking more carefully at these fuel lines, there's there's a few things happening, okay? And I'm going to have to say, number one is the connector types at the ends of the line. They're all going to be a rubber hosed steel sheath line. But when you come to the connector here, and I mentioned swivel joints and so forth, right in here, the gasketing for the valve, okay, there's actually variance. Okay, so in other words, if you just get a line, okay, and it has, if you see a picture of it, it's just a fuel line, and it looks right, and you figure, okay, I'll just get that into my valve, I don't have to swap out my valve, you might end up running into problems, okay, because of the gasketing inside the valve, okay. So typically the fuel lines, it's the tip, okay, what you see down here at this end, this little tip here, which is removable, by the way, okay, might not quite be right for your valve, okay. So often you think, okay, fine, I'll just make sure I have the valve with the line, and then we're looking at the other end. Okay. Now this one, as I said, is off. Typically, what's on this one, because it is it's a fuel line that attaches to a preheat tube, so it's slightly different. And this is the type of attachment you end up with. I don't know how we can get that pretty clear. And you notice its length. Possibly that gives you an indication as to its depth and its diameter. Okay. Very specific, because once this clamps in on the stove, in this case at the preheat tube, there's a little needle there, that little copper right near my nose. There's a black tip there, that's a little needle. So that's got to fit just right for the fuel to pass through. So if we look at this fuel line, we'll notice, well, that's not the case. However, as I said, I've taken off on mine the actual tip, and you could actually just pop this guy off and pop this guy back on. Okay. So depending on your connector type, at least at the stove end, okay, you'll most likely get away with just keeping the end, depending on the type of end, okay, it's another thing. This type of a tip for a preheat tube, there's no gasket in this thing. This thing is just really not going to really wear down in any capacity or fail. This type of tip, there's, you notice the red, just some gasketing there. Okay, so if you say, okay, well, just order something here that the other end doesn't quite look right, but it doesn't matter, as long as I have the valve, and I'll swap out, and I'll use my tip. Well, if your tip happens to have deteriorating gaskets, you're jammed up again. So it's not that simple. Finding the correct part is not that easy. Here's another fuel line for sale, and you look, well, that looks kind of familiar. There's a bolted end. This one comes with plus. It actually is a one-piece unit. Well, one piece. You get the whole kit if you wish. So I should be fine there. Again, if we look at the length of this guy, we can't really see it, and that guy, we're not looking at the same type of end for this line. Okay, so if we go to this end down here, that's going to go into the valve, so we're guaranteed a proper connection there. As far as the gasketing is concerned, and the depth and everything else, that's going to work with the valve that comes with this particular item. The other end, however, is going to be problematic, I would assume. It's not quite the same, but I did say these types of tips don't have gaskets. So, interesting. We pop off the long tip, we put in the short tip, and we're done. So this would most likely be for this type of stove, okay, the go-to piece. However, it turns out that there is actually a fuel line, very difficult to find, and it's for, at AliExpress's, their BRS series. This is sort of a modeled, pushed type of stove, much like a Whisperlite, a Primus, you know, sort of a flagship stove coming out of China. Okay, this is one of the BRS. There's videos out on the BRS series and so forth. And this is the entire replacement line. You're going to often find entire replacement lines for a specific type of stove, for, if you wish, higher end stoves. Okay, the stove I happen to have is a $35 Canadian stove. It's a great stove, I think, most likely because it spins off the Whisperlite, which I find is phenomenal the way the top of the stove is made. The gas comes out on the sides in a sort of multi-plated wafer, ridged edge wafer component, you might say. It's really phenomenal and durable. It's crazy. I love it. It's very heavy-legged. It can't compete with the Whisperlite as far as weight. There's a lot of heat dissipation along the legs, as we saw in the videos, the melting of the tape. But I just love the top of that stove, and that is most likely a spin-off from the Whisperlite. I've looked at Whisperlites, and it's a take on those. I don't know if there's a patent infringement there. I wouldn't be able to tell you. I picked up the stove for that price. I wasn't really looking kind of cheap out on Whisperlite. I was looking for a multi-fuel stove that could equally work with gas. Gas right down through to liquids, and primed and pumped up fuels with those canisters. Okay, and that's what I ended up getting. I can't afford $200 some odd, and it was very difficult to find. I think Whisperlite has an international or remote is something that does everything. And then there's this model here, and it doesn't have like a big brand name. You'll find those over at AliExpress. And they're capable of butane using adapter, isopropane, pardon me, Lindell valve. Use an adapter, you can use propane, and you switch out the nozzles, and you can start using the pump liquid fuels on that stove. Okay. Digress here slightly. Let's get back to the fuel lines. Okay, how much battery left? So this fuel line for the BRS, okay, is an actual full fuel line. And if we start to look at the tip of this guy, you might look, well, there's a rubberized seal, which is nice. Geez, they really thought of something there at the base of the stove. Does that mean it would potentially leak? Who knows? But there's a rubber seal there. There's not a rubber seal over at this end, I guess. Use your stove outside if there's a leak. It's not a big deal. Okay. So if we get a closer look, there it is. Ooh. Wow, that's a close look. I'm not going to be able to imitate that in any capacity. But we have pretty much the end we're looking for here, it would seem. Okay. It would seem. The BRS is a nozzled multi-fuel, I think, stove. I can't get this shrunk down properly. Okay. So there's the full line, and there's that picture. That's a bit better. Okay, and if I look at that, with the lighting, 5 millimeters, I'm going to measure this. I'm pretty sure that's the connector. Not 100% sure, I'm pretty sure. And because this one has this rubberized sheathing that covers up the joint there, okay, this goes right into the rubber hose. I don't know how I can get that. That goes right into the rubber hose, so you would indicate with that rubber sheathing near the stove that there is some potential leakage through the joint here. Okay, and I did mention that I had that problem with my stove, although it never ignited. But the stove used to be used outdoors, which I wasn't doing, and I was most likely taking in propane when I shouldn't have been. It was an incidental there also. So getting back to fuel lines, this might look like it does the trick, but we're not 100% sure. Okay, so we can go about ordering it. It's $10. 16 to 26 days. Let's just check the shipping if we have any other options. We don't have any faster options. Packaging time 7. We're not quite sure if we could swap out the tip. If we do, we're going to be able to get that rubber gasket thing back over. I'm going to futz a bit too much. Do we really need that rubber gasket thing? Should I use tape instead? Okay, so we might be left with something like this. We're pretty sure we just pull this guy out and put this one in. Okay, so hopefully you get the gist here. It's a bit of a long video. Replacement fuel lines aren't as simple as it seems. Again, there's the gasketing at one end that is not always the same, whether it's going to your stove or the valve. So try to get the line with the valve. 2 is, at that point going to your stove, you're not always going to find either the right gasketing, depending on the stove type, or for the preheat tube connections, you might not find the right part. So keep your pre-tube tip off of the cold line, and take a stab at something like this. For this type of stove, take a stab at something like this and putz around with the tip if it's not the right tip, and you're good to go. Okay, very difficult if you don't have this information to actually find the correct fuel line for your ISO or your Lindell valve, canister fuel, backpacking stove. Not bad. I'm still 2% battery. Steve by San Antonio Outdoors, 6 p.m. May the 3rd, 2021.